Hello again, dreamer. Come closer to the hush. Come settle into the space between sounds. Tonight, we are not chasing stars. We are drifting into something softer than light, quieter than time, and deeper than words. You are safe here, wrapped in the breath of stillness. Let your thoughts untie themselves gently. Let your ears rest, just as your eyes do when dusk falls over the earth. Close them not in fear, but in trust, for tonight we listen to the silence that is never truly silent, the silence between one heartbeat and the next. If you sit still enough, so still that even your skin begins to forget it exists, you might begin to feel it, that hush, that pause, that thin slip of nothingness between the pulse that rises and the one that follows. It's not just emptiness. It is listening. It is waiting. It is alive. Your heart does not beat in a steady drone. No, it sings. It sings in rhythm. Loob, dub, loob, dub. And in the pause between each note, your brain listens. Even though the pause lasts only fractions of a second, your brain lingers there, resting its awareness in that narrow gap. It is in that gap that stillness lives. It is in that breathless fold of time where your nervous system opens its ears the widest. The silence between heartbeats is not an absence. It is a space, a cradle where your awareness lies in wait for the next arrival. Inside your chest, your heart has always whispered in threes, a beat, a pause, a return, and your brain has always followed like a child follows a lullaby, learning its meaning, not in the sound but in the space it leaves behind. That space, that fleeting hush, is where life listens to itself. From the moment you were a tiny cluster of cells floating in the gentle dark of the womb, your brain has known how to listen for nothing. Long before you heard your mother's voice, you heard the rhythm of her blood, and in between the rush and thump of her heart, you listened, not just to what was present, but to what wasn't. Those early silences, they were your first lullabies, the first teachers of pattern, of rest, of return. Even now, grown and starlit in your own way, your brain still listens to the same patterns, still tracks the absence, like a shoreline tracks the sea, still finds safety in the ebb, before the tide returns, because silence is not the opposite of sound. It is its shape, its partner, its mirror. Deep in your brainstem, in the oldest, most primitive part of you, are circuits built not to hear sound, but to hear change, to listen to what just vanished, to track what's missing, to alert you when the world grows too still. Because once, long ago, silence could mean danger, the forest going quiet, the birds freezing mid-song, the wind holding its breath, and your brain would notice, in that flicker of stillness, that something had changed, something unseen had entered the rhythm. Even now, your brain leans toward that hush, not with fear, but with reverence, because silence is not just a lack, it is an invitation. Have you ever listened to the night, not just the crickets, not just the hum of wires, or the occasional creak of your home settling into dreams, but the night itself, that soft, heavy velvet that presses against your ears and wraps your brain in cotton-light awareness? That is the kind of silence your brain is always attending to, the kind that isn't empty, but full of space, full of waiting, full of room for noticing. Inside your auditory cortex, the part of your brain that processes sound, a quiet kind of magic happens when there is nothing to hear. Instead of shutting off, this part of your mind begins to glow, like embers after fire. It listens inward. It begins to hear the whisper of your blood, the sigh of your breath, the internal echoes of your own body. It recenters, regrounds, and reconnects, because silence is not the shutting of a door, it is the opening of one inward. In this inner chamber of quiet, neurons fire not because of what they receive, but because of what they anticipate. Anticipation is a soundless song, a hush wrapped in hope, a readiness dressed in stillness. When there is nothing outside to listen to, your brain listens to itself. its own hum, its own dreaming, its own low electrical longing. Even the cells inside your cochlea, those tiny spiral dancers in your inner ear, sway gently, even in the absence of sound. Because to be a listener is not just to respond, but to wait. And in this waiting, in this beautifully patient quiet, your brain begins to open its palm to deeper forms of knowing. This is why silence can feel sacred, why monasteries and moonlit woods and empty cathedrals can all feel like they are saying something, even when they speak no word, because your brain hears more. When there is less, it becomes like a night field after rain, soaked, receptive, humming with things just below the surface. The quiet between heartbeats is not measured in seconds. It is measured in awareness. In the space between two pulses, your brain gathers what it needs, like a wave folding in before it unfurls again. Even in the deepest silence, there is never nothing. There is the pulse, there is the pause, and there is you, the one who listens. Let's stay here for a moment, with the soft percussion of your heart guiding us gently through the night. You don't need to do anything. Your breath is enough. Your stillness is welcome, and the hush between your thoughts is exactly where we are meant to be. Because sometimes what your brain needs most is not another sound, but the space to remember it. Already knows how to listen to the quiet between everything inside your skull, that cradle of dreams, that soft electric cathedral. There are billions upon billions of neurons, not shouting, not rushing, not demanding, but waiting with a kind of patience that no human has ever truly learned. These are the listeners, the watchers, the keepers of quiet gates. Their waiting is not stillness. It is readiness. It is poetry, written in potential. In neuroscience, we call this resting state. But don't let the word fool you. The resting brain is not resting like a rock. It's resting like a cat, alert, curled still, but ready. Ready for the world. Ready for change. Ready for sound. Ready for silence. Each neuron is a thread in the vast loom of your awareness. And when nothing seems to happen, they are listening most closely. They wait like open windows, like empty cups, like a canvas before the brush. Imagine now you are in a quiet forest. So quiet, in fact, that you can hear the pine needles fall. The wind is so gentle, it moves the hair on your arms without sound. You hear nothing, but you feel everything. This is your brain, when you are surrounded by silence. Not bored, not idle, but tuned. Your neurons begin to shift, to sway together, like grasses in the hush before a storm. They whisper to one another in voltage. They flicker in possibility. They ripple with questions no one has asked yet. This, dear one, is not emptiness. It is presence. Even when your ears pick up nothing, your brain is always scanning the hush, waiting for a footstep, a change in tone, a single crack in the calm. It's not paranoia. It's awareness, a kind of biological curiosity, a forever question. What will happen next? And every neuron that waits is holding that question, not in fear, but in wonder, because to wait is to believe that something is coming. And that belief is what makes the brain not just a machine, but a poet. Some neurons specialize in this patience, especially those in your auditory cortex, the place in your brain where sounds become stories. They sit quietly when there is no sound, but their silence isn't sleep. They are rehearsing possibilities, running simulations, imagining what the next sound might be. A bird call, a footstep, a breath, a word, and the moment something does arrive, even the softest crackle, these neurons leap into action, as if they had been expecting it all along. This is how you hear, not just with ears, but with expectation. Your brain is constantly writing futures, and holding them like notes in a chord that hasn't been struck. That's why silence feels different, depending on where you are. In the hush before a song begins, your neurons wait one way. In the silence after someone finishes speaking, they wait another, because the context shapes the waiting, just like the sky shapes how a shadow falls, just like the ocean shapes how stillness sounds. There is no one kind of silence, and there is no one kind of listening. Your neurons know that. They wait accordingly. Let's drift now into one of the most magical places in your brain, a place where silence is not just absence, but guidance. It's called the default mode network, a quiet name. But don't be fooled. This network hums like galaxies. When your outer world grows quiet, it comes alive when you are doing nothing. When you're staring at the ceiling, when you're walking without thinking, when you're floating in a bath, lost in the warmth and blur, this network waits. Not for noise, but for meaning. It gathers the pieces of memory, of identity, of time, and in silence, it weaves them together like spider silk at dawn. That's why sometimes the best ideas come when you're doing nothing, when you're not trying, when you're not reaching, when your neurons are simply waiting, watching the clouds pass across the quiet sky of your mind. They are not bored, they are composing. In the stillness, your brain becomes a painter with an invisible brush. There is beauty in this waiting. There is wisdom. But here's a secret most people don't know. Your brain doesn't only listen for new sounds. It also listens for what's missing. In studies with musicians, scientists discovered that when a musical note is fapped out of a familiar melody, the brain fires, not because of what was there, but because of what wasn't. The neurons waited, expected, prepared, and when nothing arrived, they noticed. This is called predictive coding. A poetic phrase, isn't it? As if your neurons were reading fate a few milliseconds ahead. Waiting isn't passive. It is a kind of guessing, an elegant dance between reality and imagination. And so, in every quiet moment, your brain is painting futures, running quiet rehearsals, spinning the stillness into thread. The neurons that wait are sculptors of potential. They don't need sound, they need space, like seeds beneath the soil, waiting for rain, like stars beyond the sky, waiting for night. These neurons are always listening, even when you are not. Now take a breath, a long, slow one, and notice the space between inhale and exhale, that tiny pause that is a neuron's favorite place to be, suspended, expectant, soft. When nothing stirs, they do not sleep, they dream. They hold your entire life in stillness, memories, names, hopes you've forgotten you planted, all of them held lightly in the palms of neurons that never speak, but never stop listening. Most people think of thought as invisible, intangible, a flicker behind the eyes, a blur, a whisper without a source. But your brain, that quiet cathedral of consciousness, hears each thought as if it were a sound, a ripple through the still pond of your awareness. It doesn't echo through air, it doesn't vibrate the bones of your ears, but it vibrates and your brain listens to it, as carefully as it would to the voice of someone you love. Let us begin in the quiet folds of your brain's temporal lobes, tucked just above your ear. Here, nestled like seeds in the soft garden of your mind, live the cells that process language, that translate symbols into meaning, and silence into something you can name. These cells don't care whether the words come from the world or from within, whether someone whispers them to you in the dark, or whether they arrive like birds landing on a branch, somewhere deep in your thinking. To your brain, inner speech and outer sound are nearly the same. So when you hear your thoughts in your own voice, the brain lights up as if someone else were speaking to you, as if the silence had formed a mouth and it had spoken your name. Your Broca's area, in the left hemisphere of your brain, is the conductor of your inner monologue. It crafts the phrasing, picks the pace, adds rhythm to the river of your thoughts. But here's the secret: when you're not speaking aloud, it still hums, still composes, still mouths the music of your mind's voice. So when you sit in silence, and words pour through you like a soft stream, I should do this, I wonder about that, I remember when, that's not just imagination, that's sound, sound without air, a voice made of neurons. Now float further inward. There are thoughts even quieter than language, the ones that come without words, a feeling, a picture, a memory blooming like a flower, without ever saying its name. These thoughts rise from deeper soil, from your default mode network, your imagination's oldest state. Here, your brain drifts without needing direction. It dreams while you're awake. It sketches without hands. It sings without sound. And even these voiceless currents, not by your ears, but by the rhythm keepers within you, those same cells that pulse to memory, emotion, and story. Your thoughts, the ones that don't speak, still echo, still leave shadows, still resonate, like wind chimes in a place where there is no wind. The brain listens to these inner melodies with extraordinary detail. It tracks the pitch of your worries, the tempo of your hopes, the tremble of questions that haven't found answers yet. Even before a thought becomes conscious, your brain has already heard it coming. Like feeling a storm in your bones before the sky has changed. Like sensing someone watching before the eyes appear. But here is where the story becomes even stranger, even more magical. Because your brain doesn't just listen to your thoughts, it listens to how you feel about your thoughts. That is, it listens not only to the voice inside your mind, but to the silence that follows it. Have you ever noticed a thought appears, and then a quiet pause, a hum, a sense of yes or no, that doesn't use any language at all? That's your emotional brain, listening in, your limbic system, your amygdala, your tiny soft oracles, tucked into the folds of your being, translating feeling into meaning. And all of this happens in silence. Not a blank silence, but a listening silence, an internal acoustic, as delicate as snowfall, as private as breath. This is why stillness feels louder, when your mind is full, because even without any outer noise, your brain is lit from within, a city at night, all lights on, each window glowing with its own monologue. This is also why meditation can feel like a conversation with the whole universe. Because when you grow quiet, you begin to hear just how much your mind is saying all the time. And when you simply let it speak, without judgment, without interruption, without trying to fix it or hush it, the thoughts begin to change tone. They soften, they unwind, they begin to sound less like commands and more like songs. Some neuroscientists call this phenomenon metacognition, thinking about your thinking. But in the quiet of night, that phrase feels too clinical, too sharp. I like to think of it as listening to your own river. You don't have to analyze every ripple. You don't have to label every wave. You just watch it pass. You sit beside it. You let the current tell you what it needs. That's the sound of thought. And the brain listens not with rules, but with reverence. Your thoughts are not intruders. They are guests. They are birds that land on your windowsill. They arrive, they pause, and then they fly on. Your brain knows this. That's why it waits, why it gives them space, why it listens, even when you're trying not to listen. Because silence isn't the absence of thinking, it's the awareness of it. Inside your skull is a concert that never ends. A composition made of memories, of dreams, of plans you haven't yet made, and fears you no longer remember the name of. And the brain, your beautiful, waiting brain, doesn't shut it off when the world grows quiet. It just turns inward, adjusts the dials, and begins to tune to the frequency of self. In the space between lightning and thunder, there is a kind of waiting. The world pauses. Even the trees seem to lean forward, as if listening for the sound that hasn't come yet. And so does your brain. The moment after a crack of thunder fades, the neurons quiet down like an audience holding its breath. Not because there is no stimulus, but because silence has arrived. And silence for the brain is never empty. It is full, full of anticipation, full of meaning, full of invisible music. The mind invents in its own secret theatre. Let's drift deeper now, into the folds of your auditory cortex, that miraculous ribbon curled within the temporal lobe, like a seashell pressed against the tides of time. Even when all is quiet, this region never sleeps. It listens, ceaselessly, silently, listening, not just to outer sound, but to inner absence, to imagined echoes, to phantom vibrations. It hears not just what is, but what could be, what was, and what is no longer. Like a deer in a forest clearing, ears pricked not for what moves, but for what doesn't move anymore. This is how the brain listens to nothing. It listens like it matters. Now let's close our eyes together and imagine a meadow at night. There are stars above, sleeping wildflowers below. A breeze stirs the grasses, just enough to whisper. Then a pause. The wind stops, the leaves still, and your brain, like the quiet field, enters a moment of open listening. This isn't boredom. This isn't absence. This is presence, of a different kind. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, a web of brain regions that becomes active, not when you're doing something, but when you're doing nothing, when you rest, when you daydream, when you stare at the sky with no name on your lip. It's the brain's way of tuning into the silence, of playing back the memories that haven't spoken in years, of filling the stillness with inner sound, a mother's voice, a lost friend's laugh, the hush of a room that no longer exists. Even in stillness, the brain sings, not with noise, but with remembrance. And so, the question turns like a silver key. When you think you are hearing nothing, what is your brain truly hearing? Maybe it's not just emptiness. Maybe silence itself is a kind of language. A language without words, without rhythm, without pitch. And yet your neurons respond. They flicker. They pulse. They lean into it, like flowers lean into night. In fMRI scans, when people sit in soundproof chambers, the auditory cortex doesn't go dark. It lights up, not in despair but in attention. It listens with more interest, as if waiting for the first drop of rain, as if building a model of the world where even the lack of sound means something. Now let's walk through another metaphor. The concert hall, just before the symphony begins, musicians tuning, whispers in the audience, a scattered cough. Then, the conductor raises the baton, and the whole room goes silent. It is in that moment, not the music, that your brain becomes alert in its deepest way. The silence before the song is what sharpens the ear, what prepares the soul, what opens the heart to receive beauty. The silence makes room. Your brain knows this rhythm intuitively. It builds expectation gaps. When you hear a pattern, a ticking clock, a dripping tap, a steady drumbeat, your mind fills in the silence between each beat, not passively, not idly, but actively. It predicts the sound that should follow, and when it doesn't arrive, that silence feels louder than thunder. Because now your brain is searching, scanning, bracing, feeling. The absence has become the story. The missing piece becomes the focus. This is called predictive coding. A beautiful phrase. It means your brain is always guessing. And when it listens to nothing, it's not resting. It's waiting, like a child waiting for a door to open. Now let's travel even deeper into this quiet world. Close your eyes again. Let's visit the cochlea, that tiny spiral in your inner ear, coiled like a nautilus in your skull. Inside it, thousands of microscopic hairs sway and fluid. They translate sound waves into electrical signals, like wind playing a harp made of silk and lightning. But when there's no sound at all, what do these tiny hairs do? They hum. Yes, even in silence, the auditory system generates its own whispers, its own secret music. Sometimes this emerges as tinnitus, a ringing no one else can hear. Sometimes it's subtler, like hearing your own heartbeat in the stillness of night. The brain invents sound to fill the space, because silence, to the brain, is never truly silent. Imagine now a room where someone once spoke. Their voice is gone. The air is still, and yet you can almost hear them again, can't you? This is the echo of memory, woven with the threads of silence. It's how your brain keeps holding conversations with people who are no longer speaking, sometimes no longer living. This is called auditory imagery, the mind's inner radio, the whisper that memory makes when the world has gone quiet. And oh, how real it feels, the lilt of a lullaby, the rhythm of a rainstorm, the voice that once told you, you're safe, even in a soundless room. Your brain carries the full orchestra of your life so far and listens for the cues to bring them back. Let's pause here, feel your breath again, in, out, in, out. Feel how each breath falls into a quiet space, like footprints on snow, soft, unhurried, listening. Your brain listens not just for the world, but for you. It listens to your heartbeat, to the murmur of your blood, to the rhythm of your breath, to the echo of your own thoughts as they drift like mist through your inner sky. Even now, it listens to these words, this gentle story, as if you were lying beside a river and the water spoke in sleep's own language. And here, in this silence, something sacred unfolds. It's called resting state activity, a technical phrase, but what it really means is, your brain, when left alone, doesn't shut off. It dreams, not the dreams of sleep, but the dreams of quiet wakefulness, of moments when you stare out a window and the world stops asking questions, when you sit beside someone you love and say nothing, but feel everything. This is the silence your brain loves best, not empty, but meaningful, not lonely, but full of communion. It is in this silence that empathy grows, that creativity stirs, that self-awareness gently wakes like a bird lifting its head from under wing. There is a stillness, not made of silence, but shaped like it, a stillness that hums beneath conversation, beneath the creak of branches, beneath breath and bone. We often think of sound as a wave, a shout, a crash, a violin string trembling in open air. But what if the brain, that quiet cartographer of our inner lives, was not only listening to sound, but listening for its absence, noticing the spaces between notes, like stars between constellations, not hearing the drumbeat, but the air that carries it. Deep within the folds of the auditory cortex, something marvelous unfolds, the attention to nothing, to pauses, to breaks, to what is not there, like a child waiting between two thunderclaps, counting the distance with heartbeats alone. This chapter belongs to those spaces, to the thresholds where sound once stood, and has since vanished. The ear is sculpted for sound, but the brain is a weaver of gaps. Even now, as you listen, there are milliseconds slipping past your awareness, micro-horizons where no sound lives, and yet your brain marks them carefully, measuring duration, measuring change, measuring the empty. Imagine the soft clack of a typewriter, not just the sound of the key, but the moment before it hit, the stretch of breath as the typist pauses, thinking, the beat before the idea arrives. That beat is where the brain leans forward, like an animal in tall grass, who hears not the predator's footstep, but the sudden stillness of the forest, a hush that signals more than any roar could say. In music it's called a rest, in language, a comma, in poetry a breath, and in the mind it's a cathedral, where sound once echoed, and now does not. The brain lights up, a strange reverence for what isn't here. Somewhere inside you is a timekeeper, with no ticking clock. It counts without sound, keeps rhythm in silence. This is the basal ganglia, a humble circle of cells that helps us dance, even in stillness. It knows when a beat should come, even if it doesn't. It senses delay. It holds a ghost rhythm in the folds of thought. That's how you can tell when someone stops mid-sentence and something feels wrong. Even if they said nothing odd, your brain knew what should have been. A hiccup in the silence, a shadow in the absence. The brain listens with memory and prediction, like a bird that sings to fill the gap before the next dawn. Close your eyes now. Listen to the nothing around you, not the hum of the fridge, not the soft shuffle of night air, but the places in between, the cracks in the hush, your brain is already there, probing the dark with lanterns of attention, searching for the structure of silence, because silence is not one thing, it is many. The silence after someone leaves, the silence before someone speaks, the silence that follows thunder, the silence that holds grief or awe or sleep, each one shaped differently in the brain. The amygdala holds the silence of fear. The prefrontal cortex holds the silence of focus. The default mode network, that soft meandering stream of thought, holds the silence of daydream. You think you are doing nothing, but your brain is a conductor, pulling strings in the quiet. Even in meditation, when monks try to empty thought, their brains do not fall silent. They just change the kind of silence they live in. Some silences are active, some are spacious, some are fragile like soap bubbles, some are deep, like ocean trenches, where no sound can reach. But the brain still listens. It listens because every silence means something. Let's walk deeper into the void between noises. There is a phenomenon known as the gap detection threshold. How small a pause the brain can detect between two sounds. For most of us, it's about 2 milliseconds, a sliver of time, so thin you could fit 500 of them into a single blink. And yet the brain catches it, marks it, interprets it. Why? Because timing matters. In speech, in footsteps, in survival. Your brain is a mathematician of time. It watches every beat and every break. And when sound goes missing, it doesn't panic. It calculates. It asks, was that silence intentional? Was it meaningful? Is it a sign? The brain listens to the void, like an astronomer listens to dark matter, knowing that what cannot be seen might still shape galaxies. This ability lives in the old architecture of the brainstem and the midbrain, those deep, ancient halls that evolved when silence meant a predator nearby, the pause between rustles, the gap before the attack. But not all silence is fear. Some is reverent, like in the concert hall, where a symphony ends and the room holds its breath for just a moment longer. That sacred pause is not empty. It's full of meaning, full of memory, and the brain lights up, not in the places for language or action, but in the networks for emotion, attention, and time. The insula, that delicate island of feeling, activates in moments of stillness. It bridges the outer world and your inner. It listens to nothing and hears everything. The slight hush before a kiss, the pause after I love you, the space between goodbye and the closing door. Every pause holds a universe of sensation. And your brain, dear listener, is the stargaze. Even now, beneath the hum of thought, your neurons are pulsing in rhythms we do not hear. Brain waves, alpha, beta, delta, each one a kind of silence, because silence does not mean off. It means inward. It means watch. It means listening with breath instead of ear. The default mode network, that soft companion of daydream, flickers most when you're doing nothing. But it isn't nothing. It's imagination, memory, into the spaces in your mind where sounds were once stored and now echo as dreams. So even when there is no music, you hum. Even when there is no voice, you remember one. Even when the world goes quiet, you do not. Let the story of silence deepen now. A silence inside silence, like a whisper, hiding in a well. Beneath the surface silence of a room, your brain is still at work, but not in noise, not in words, not in words, not even in thought. It listens for absence. It waits for the unspoken, measures stillness, like a sailor reading windless water. And in that waiting, it makes meaning. Have you ever paused mid-sentence, searching for a word, and felt the quiet The brain opens its hands in those moments, offering nothing, receiving everything. For deep in the auditory cortex, the machinery of hearing never truly shuts off. Even in darkness, it listens. Even in silence, it waits, not for music, not for voice, but for the way absence echoes. This is not emptiness, this is fertile ground. The absence of sound is a presence in disguise, and the brain is its gardener. In stillness, neural circuits hum lightly, like bees in a field without flowers, not because they are idle, but because they are poised. The brain does not sleep when sound sleeps. It shifts, it breathes, it becomes a cathedral, waiting for the footsteps of echo. Now imagine you're in a room lined with soft velvet walls. No clocks, no ticking, no voices. Even your breath feels like it's borrowed. It is not just quiet. It is an echoic, a place where sound goes to die or be reborn. These rooms exist, engineered to cancel the world. They reveal what is left behind when all else is stripped away. And people do not stay long, because in such places, you begin to hear things you were never meant to hear. The sound of your blood climbing staircase vessels, the groan of your joints as they settle like old houses, the heartbeat rising like a question, then falling like an answer. This is what happens when silence grows thick enough to become a mirror. The brain in silence turns inward, and not always gently. In the absence of noise, the mind produces its own music. Tinnitus, sometimes, phantom ringing, or the soft hiss of neural wind rushing through imagined corridors. Silence, for some, becomes sound. For others, it becomes memory. For all, it becomes something. We are not built to hear nothing. So the brain, ever faithful, fills the well. And yet, not all silence is created equal. There is the silence that frightens, and the silence that frees, the silence that isolates, and the silence that invites. The brain knows the difference. It has spent lifetimes learning to read the contours of quiet, to feel whether it cradles you or leaves you stranded. Sometimes silence is a warm room where thought lies down to rest. Sometimes silence is the breath between heartbeats. Sometimes silence is the message itself. Let us walk now into the resting place of monks, stone corridors, bare feet on cold earth, and a vow that says, I will not speak, so I may learn to hear, but not to hear the world, to hear the world's absence. In those monasteries of mind, the brain learns the language of non-language, the soft cadence of candlelight, the rhythm of footsteps in prayer. No voice, no instruction, yet the mind listens closely to the flutter of thoughts, like birds against stained glass. And here, neurons do not race, they settle, they pulse in meditative loops, echoing the breath. What fires in the brain during such silence is not chaos, but coherence, not emptiness, but elegance. In silence, the default mode network awakens, the system of self, of dream, of reflection. It comes alive, not when we act, but when we pause, not when we speak, but when we drift into thought. So strange, that to know ourselves we must first hush. The brain has always known this, that memory grows stronger in quiet reflection, that healing happens in the lull between struggles. That understanding often arrives without a single sound. Silence is not the absence of information, it is the soil in which insight grows. Now, let us descend deeper, past the hum of cities, past the hush of countryside, down into the cave of the mind, a cave where no voice has ever reached, where time melts like wax, where the only sound is the faint dreamlike flicker of thought brushing against the wall. Here your brain listens differently, not to sound, not even to meaning, but to sensation, to tone, to feeling. Silence becomes music, without notes, texture without touch, a kind of hearing that doesn't require ears. And in this ancient chamber, this neural grotto, echoes return, but not from sound. They come from memory, from longing, from something older than either. Even here, in this imagined stillness, the brain is building, painting the walls of silence with murals of imagination. In the earliest days of life, when you floated in the warm dark of a mother's body, you learned to hear not language, but rhythm, heartbeat, breath, the throb of blood and womb. It was not silence exactly, but not sound as we know it either. It was the music of being held. The brain remembers this. So when you lie in stillness, in a room dim with quiet, and you feel safe, there is something in you that smiles, because it remembers the first silence, the one that came with love. And when silence comes again, not as threat but as comfort, the brain does not resist. It opens its gates and lets the quiet flood in, like moonlight across water. Here creativity begins, not in noise, but in the breath before the idea, not in shouting, but in the hush before something new is born. Artists speak of inspiration as something that arrives in silence. Writers speak of words as something carved from the block of quiet. The brain listens for these things, not with tension, but with stillness. It waits, it opens, it receives, and sometimes the most profound listening comes in the middle of the night, when even the stars seem hushed. You lie awake, not anxious, but alert to something you cannot name. The walls creak, the wind turns over in its sleep. And still, there is something deeper, a silence that presses, not against your ears, but into your thoughts, and the brain, unafraid, welcomes it, because silence is not the enemy of thought. It is its companion, its shadow, its mirror, and when the brain listens to nothing, truly nothing, that is when everything becomes possible. The symphony of silence has more instruments than sound ever will, and the brain, attuned through millennia, has learned to hear them all. The rustle of neurons in quiet creation, the settling of thoughts into gentle form, the arrival of understanding, like dawn through mist. In the stillness, your brain constructs sound, not imaginary, not false, but shaped from the scaffolding of expectation. It replays the world in silence. A door closing, a child laughing, a crow lifting from wire. Not here, not now, but real. As real as the breath in your chest and the pulse in your fingers. This is the echo inside silence. The sound of what should have been, what could have been, what once was, in the far fields of the auditory cortex, where sound is interpreted into shape and color and meaning. Even silence arrives clothed in history. Neurons trained in rhythm, trained by years of language and birdsong, continue to fire in their familiar patterns, even when no air is moving. The brain is a listener, not of noise, but of pattern, and patterns do not disappear. They linger, they haunt, they echo. Imagine a whisper. It doesn't need to reach your ears. Imagine the word home, spoken gently. Did your mind hear it? Did your body respond? You may have felt a flutter in the chest, a soft pull toward a memory, a hallway in afternoon light, a kettle steaming on a distant stove. This is the brain listening to nothing, and yet receiving everything. There is an ancient theater within us, older than words, older than music. It lives in the brain stem, curled like a fern in the early spring of your nervous system. It listens not for music, but for movement, not for melody, but for meaning. In the jungle, in the dark, in the hush before the predator strikes, this ancient theater listens to silence, because silence is dangerous. When birds go quiet, when wind holds its breath, when the world suddenly hushes, the body listens harder. The absence of sound becomes a presence, and so the brain evolved not just to hear sound, but to interpret silence, to thread absence into a story, to anticipate, to respond, to prepare. The hush before thunder, the breath before a scream, the quiet just before a voice says your name. In a lab, scientists placed people in a room with no sound, an anechoic chamber, a cathedral of stillness, no echoes, no hum, no clock ticking, no fan spinning, only the silence of the self. But what the participants heard was far from quiet. They heard their heartbeat, their lungs expanding like sails. They heard the blood whisper through vessels. They heard the bones creak and the muscles sigh. And many, after only minutes, beg to leave, because when all the world's sound is gone, the brain does not rest. It fills the void. It calls forward the ghosts of forgotten noise. It amplifies what it can hear, the interior, the unseen. This is the echo chamber of self, where silence is a mirror, and the mind stares too deeply into its own reflection. Children, too, learn to navigate silence in this strange way. A baby hears their mother's voice in the womb, rhythmic, filtered through water and heartbeat. They learn cadence before meaning, a lullaby of vowels, a tide of tone. When that voice is absent, even momentarily, the child listens harder. They reach with their nervous system, not outward but inward, and slowly, the silence becomes a signal, a space to be filled. The brain begins to generate the voice, to remember it, to cradle it in imagination. This is how memory is born in silence, and how silence becomes a form of love. In monasteries carved into stone hillsides, monks once practiced deep listening. They sat in silence, not to avoid sound, but to hear what the ordinary world obscures: the flicker of thought, the rhythm of breath, the movement of God in the still place. The brain in meditation behaves differently. Auditory regions still active, yes, but now synchronized with heart, with breath, with the internal clock. They are listening not for music, but for presence. When the external world quiets, the internal world becomes vivid. The rustling of thought, the scent of memory, the touch of an old sorrow, and the brain listens, not to react, not to analyze, but to witness. Scientists once asked, what happens when we listen to nothing but still expect to hear? In studies, the auditory cortex activates, even when no sound is present, so long as the person believes it might occur. Expectation becomes a kind of sound, a trick, no, a truth. The brain does not pass. Receive. It actively sculpts. It carves silence into possibility. It creates the shadow of sound, the way a sculptor sees form in marble, before a single chip has fallen. In this sense, silence is not the absence of sound, but the potential of sound, a waiting room of music, a doorway to inner speech. And what of those who live in constant silence? The deaf, the hard of hearing, do they listen to nothing? No. Their brains rewire. The auditory cortex does not die. It does not atrophy. It adapts. It begins to listen in different ways: to sight, to vibration, to the rhythm of movement, to touch. In the deaf brain, silence is not empty. It is translated. It is transformed. The rustle of hands in sign language activates the same regions as spoken words, and some report a kind of internal music, not sound, exactly, but a felt rhythm, a dance of images across the stage of thought. In this way, the brain always listens, always, to sound, to silence, to gesture, to memory, always. Have you ever laid beneath the stars and felt the immensity of space press down on you? Felt how quiet it is, and how that quiet is not empty, but full? This is the deep silence the brain was born into. Not the silence of nothing, but the silence of everything at rest. The silence between heartbeats, the silence between words, the silence that falls when someone you love enters the room and says nothing, and yet everything changes. The brain hears that, even if you don't, even if you never speak of it again. There is a place in your brain where silence and sound become indistinguishable, where imagined voices are treated like real ones, where memories of song light up the same pathways as the song itself. This is the poetic truth of listening. That silence contains more music than the loudest orchestra. That quiet carries the loudest truth. The brain listens to nothing, and in that nothing, it finds meaning, pattern, peace, or sorrow, or beauty, or longing. What you find there depends on you, on what your body has remembered, on what your soul is waiting for. The neurons, those delicate dancers, usually move in bright chains of fire. They leap, They spark, they chatter like birds in the trees. But in the landscape of nothing, they slow. They do not sleep. They listen, a kind of listening that is not made of ears, but of presence. Imagine a lake, still, unmoving, and then one drop, a ripple, and from that ripple, an entire forest is reflected anew. This is how the mind behaves when nothing enters. It sees itself more clearly. Stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the space in which thought sees its own face. When you sit alone in a room, and the ticking clock stops, you do not vanish. You become larger. The brain, given nothing, becomes everything, without distraction, without noise, without the flicker of attention chasing every light. The brain folds inward, like a flower in moonlight, softly reconfiguring its petals to feel where it has never looked before. There is a gentle rhythm to thought in stillness, not the sharp rhythm of words, nor the sweeping rhythm of emotion, but something subtler, like waves rising beneath frozen ice. Beneath the still surface, the mind drifts into deeper waters. It begins to play with shadows, not to fear them. It starts to notice breath as if for the first time, not to control it, but to remember it. You are breathing, yes, but when you forget that you are breathing, you return to the place where the brain listens, without effort. In laboratories, this quiet has a name, the default mode network, but to the poet, it is the soul's lantern, flickering in the windless cave. When the world around you dims, and you are no longer attending to the things that beg for your eyes, this network lights up, not to act, but to remember, to dream, to wander the rooms of your inner cathedral, where no one else has ever been. The brain at rest is not idle. It is mapping galaxies made from memory, constructing whole stories without ink, rebuilding your past with softer edges. What does the brain do when nothing happens? It wanders, and this wandering, this quiet, is not lostness. It is finding. It is becoming again. When you sit still and let your gaze rest, not on something, but on the soft blurry middle distance, where edges blur and names disappear, you enter the dream work of the brain. Here it pieces together not answers, but questions. Who are you when no one is asking? What do you remember when nothing is telling you to? What rises like a bubble from the ocean floor when the waters grow calm? It is in this space that insight lives, not forced into form, but rising like fog over morning fields, uninvited, uncommanded, but suddenly there. When you stop chasing the thought, it turns and offers its hand, and sometimes the best thoughts we ever have arrive not when we try, but when we surrender. So many of history's great minds, Einstein, Newton, Poincaré, all under revelations, not in the fever of effort, but in walks, in dreams, in quiet. The brain listens best when nothing is speaking. Have you ever floated in a bathtub, ears just beneath the surface, hearing only the blood in your own veins and the soft rush of yourself? That is the sound of your brain, listening to nothing, and in that nothing, the beginning of something, a thought not yet born, a memory softened by time, a story you had forgotten, you were telling yourself. The architecture of thought begins in these quiet moments, like seeds beneath frozen soil. Ideas form under the cover of darkness, not because the sun has left, but because the dark teaches them to reach inward. And the brain, that faithful gardener, knows when to rest its hands, knows that in waiting, new roots form, in the hush of monasteries, in the stillness of deserts, in the slow silence of breath watched closely. The mind meets itself, and what it sees is not emptiness, but openness, not blankness, but invitation. Here the lines between emotion and memory blur. The past becomes water, the self becomes wind, and the brain, no longer chasing signals, becomes a still drum that echoes with every footstep ever taken in the long hallway of your life. Sometimes the quiet hurts, because in the absence of noise, old echoes return, memories uninvited, emotions unfinished, grief like a moth in the chest. But even this is listening. The brain listening to its own broken song, not to fix it, not to silence it, but to finally hear what it tried to speak when you were too busy to listen. There is courage in stillness. To meet yourself without distraction takes more bravery than battle. To be alone and not run. To be quiet and not reach for sound. To feel the mind fall inward like a feather on deep water. This is not nothing. This is everything. The brain, when offered nothing, does not go dark. It goes home. It returns to its oldest patterns, its slow dances of rest, its rhythmic dreaming, its ancient tides, and in this return, it becomes something else. Not a machine, not a sponge, but a mirror held to the sky, so it can reflect the stars that have always lived inside you. The body breathes, unaware of the mind's quiet voyage. Lungs, obedient and soft, move like distant waves under moonlight. The heart slows as if honoring a sacred hush. Inside the folds of the brain, those curled, tender petals of grey and white. Something extraordinary happens, without input, without noise. The brain is not idle. It is more alive than ever, because silence is not the absence of activity. It is the presence of awareness, and the brain, when bathed in silence, becomes a forest after rain, soaking, storing, growing beneath the stillness. The order cortex, shaped like a shell that once lived under a deep sea, rests in a kind of waiting, but it is not sleep. It is vigil. The hair cells of the cochlea may no longer quiver with waves of air, but the neural symphony behind the ears still hums. It hums without a conductor, without applause, because it remembers sound, and in remembering it recreates. This room of the mind listens not to noise, but to potential, to what could be, but hasn't been, to the breath between thoughts, to the pause between sentences, to the hush before the violin begins its long first note. In deep silence, the default mode network stirs like a sleeping child. This is the circuitry of inwardness, of memories, daydreams and ghosts. When the world goes quiet, the self grows louder, and so, in the still room of the brain, you might meet yourself, not the version that speaks or walks or types, but the soft one, the one made of fog and tide pools and half-formed wishes. Silence is a mirror, but it does not reflect faces. It reflects what lies beneath them. Here the brain begins its secret conversations. What have I forgotten? Who am I, without noise? What is the shape of waiting? Each neuron flickers like a lighthouse in the fog, signaling only to itself, mapping not the world outside, but the deep ocean of within. Imagine this. You are floating in a black sea. There is no shore, no wind, no song of seabirds, but your body is safe, buoyed by something unseen. This is what the brain feels in true silence. A gentle suspension, a surrender to the invisible. And even here there is activity. But it is not the frantic kind. It is the kind of work a seed does beneath the soil. The kind that knows timing better than sound. Slow waves roll across the cortex, like old whispers traveling from one memory to another. Synapses prune and weave. Ideas that once clashed find peace. Emotions soften their edges. This room of the mind is a monastery without monks, a chamber of gentle restructuring, and in the absence of stimulus, the brain makes its own music. Somewhere in the parietal lobe, your sense of space dims. You forget the outline of your body. You forget the borders between skin and world. In silence, the illusion of separateness dissolves. You are not you. You are everything. The brain, no longer occupied with listening for danger or delight, extends itself into a vastness it cannot name, not as a thought, but as a sensation, a subtle warmth that expands like a breath into the dark. This is the sacred geometry of stillness, where self becomes sky and brain becomes breeze. Many have called this meditation. Others call it prayer, but the brain calls it home. This is the ancient room, older than words, older than song. Even in the womb, before the first cry, this room is present. And long after the last word is spoken, when the breath is slowed for the final time, this room remains. The brain, like a temple, does not disappear when the bells stop ringing. It waits, in silence. The amygdala, the little almond of fear, grows quiet too. No longer inflamed by alarm, it begins to shrink, soften, cool. Peace is not the absence of fear, it is the presence of calm, and this calm has architecture. It is built, slowly, in these quiet sessions. One breath at a time, one still second after another. The longer you remain in the room of silence, the more your brain rewires its circuits towards tranquility. This is not a metaphor, it is biology. Monks in meditation, children in daydream, pain patients in soundproof rooms. Their brains change in the same ways. The quiet is not empty, it is restorative. It is medicine for the nervous system. It is balm for the woundless ache we carry inside. Somewhere deeper still, beneath thought and function, beneath name and narrative, the brain holds on to a rhythm. It is not a beat, it is not a pattern of waves. It is simply a knowing that silence is not punishment, not void, not death, but return. Return to the space before language, return to the moment before memory, return to the self that simply exists. No proving, no striving, no performance, just being, and in being, listening to nothing, and through that nothing, to everything. As you sit now, reading these words, pause. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the room around you blur. Let the noises fall away. Can you feel it? The faint glow beneath your thoughts. That is the room, the still room of the mind. It is not elsewhere. It is not later. It is now, and it has always been with you. Even in a noisy world, even with horns and headlines and the humming of machines, the room still waits. You don't need total silence, only stillness inside. You can enter it in a breath, in the blink between blinks, in the space between your own heartbeat and the next. The brain knows how. It remembers the map. You only need to follow it. Not outward, but in. The thalamus, the brain's great relay station, slows its signaling. Like a train station in winter, its tracks are quiet, waiting for arrival, but no arrival comes. And that is the beauty of it. There is no destination in this room. There is only presence, and that presence has texture. It is soft like moss, cool like moonlight, vast like an unmapped cave. It wraps around you without weight. It fills you without taking space. In the ancient texts of desert monks, in the whispered chants of Himalayan mystics, in the soft breath of a mother cradling her child, this silence lives, not because it is rare, but because it is holy, and the brain, miraculous and fragile, has always known it. It is not trained to find noise. It is born to find stillness. We are not only sound makers, we are silence listeners. That is why we rest in quiet places, why we close our eyes after songs, why we sigh after storms, because silence is not a void. It is the return, and the brain, in all its endless complexity, is built to return. Silence has always been misnamed. We think it means absence, emptiness, a blank space between notes. But the brain does not agree. To the brain, silence is not the lack of sound. It is an event, a happening, a signal of incredible meaning. For what is silence but the change in noise, the pause that says something has ended, or something is about to begin? What is silence but the edge of sound? The brain is a creature of contrast. It detects shifts, borders, gradients. It is a weaver of difference. And so, when all goes quiet, it leans forward with alert attention. It does not rest. It listens harder. In a monastery tucked in the mountains, a monk sits for hours in the company of no one. He calls it prayer, but a neuroscientist might call it deep internal activation. For when the world grows silent, when the ears report no new input, the brain does something extraordinary. It begins to listen to itself. The default mode network, that gentle hum of introspection, lights up like a lantern behind the forehead. Memories surface. Imaginary conversations unfold. Daydreams swell like waves, not because of boredom, but because of absence. The brain, a violin, needs silence to echo, to feel its own resonance, to play with time. Let's travel now, deeper into that nothingness, into the MRI chambers where scientists study what the brain does in the absence of sound. They place the subjects in a room with no beeps, no voices, no ticking clocks, only the distant pulse of blood in the ears. The machines scan quietly, electrodes record, and what they find surprises them. Even in the purest sensory deprivation, the brain does not go still. In fact, it becomes almost orchestral. Visual areas flicker with imagined light. Auditory regions pulse with internal rhythm. The hippocampus plays memories like silent films. Nothing outside, but everything inside. The mind, faced with nothing, creates, not from vanity, not from fear, but because silence is not the end of input. It is a signal to begin generating meaning from within. There is a place in the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, that activates when we make mistakes, or face uncertainty, or notice something, and strangely, this same region lights up in moments of deep silence. As if silence itself were a signal of change, a puzzle to solve, a doorway to open. We thought silence would calm the brain, but sometimes it startles it awake. Because silence is unfamiliar in a world that chatters. We are creatures raised in rhythm, footsteps, voices, buzzing lights, and when that rhythm drops away, the brain does not sleep. It notices. It says something's different. Pay attention. In the quiet before a thunderstorm, trees seem to hold their breath, birds still their wings, and somewhere in your nervous system, a ripple rises. You feel it, don't you? That eerie anticipatory silence. It is not empty, it is electric. The brain knows that silence can be a prelude to sound, a danger perhaps, or a revelation, and so it primes the body. It tunes the nerves, it sharpens the senses. The silence of a forest is never truly silent. It is full of poised awareness. The brain listens to that nothing, as if it were music not yet played. But what happens when silence is chosen, when we sit alone, eyes closed, welcoming the hush like an old friend? What does the brain do with intentional quiet? This too has been studied in long-term meditators. Researchers found a beautiful thing. The thalamus, the relay station of sensory input, begins to dim the noise. The auditory cortex quiets. The chatter of inner speech dissolves. And in that stillness, the frontal lobes light up with clarity. Compassion grows. Self-awareness strengthens. Not through words, not through knowledge, but through the practice of hearing what isn't there. There is a term in music, rest. It marks the pause between notes, a breath in the melody, a moment of waiting. Composers write rests into their work with care, not as gaps but as part of the song. Beethoven once said, "The silences between the notes are just as important." The brain agrees. When we listen to music, and a sudden silence arrives, neurons fire intensely. That pause becomes the most meaningful moment, because expectation and absence meet there, because the brain is listening, not just to what is, but to what might come next. This is predictive coding, a silent dialogue between now and maybe. Even in sleep, the brain listens to silence. In deep stages of non-REM sleep, external noise is shut out. And yet when the room grows quiet, unnaturally quiet, the brain stirs, because silence in sleep can mean threat, or something unknown. And so beneath the waves of delta rhythm, a sentinel remains. The brain always listening, even to nothing, especially to nothing, because in the void, the mind keeps its post. The auditory system does not close. It hums in the background, waiting for a change. The absence of sound is not ignored. It is processed. It becomes a shape in the landscape. Silence is not one thing. There are kinds of silence, textures of nothingness, the silence of the womb, the silence of morning, the silence of the star, the silence between two people who understand. Each kind speaks differently to the brain. Each is mapped, known and carried. The brain, after all, is not just an organ of sound. It is an organ of meaning, and even nothing can mean something. Even silence carries weight. In moments of awe, standing beneath the northern lights, watching a child sleep, staring into space, we fall silent, not because we lack words, but because the brain steps into a different mode, a reverent mode. The default noise fades, and a new stillness takes over. That stillness is not blank. It is full of presence, of awareness, of being. This is why some say silence is sacred, because it's in those moments that the brain returns to something deeper than language, something older than words, a listening that does not name, a hearing that does not interpret, just being. Imagine now a bay, deep underground, total silence, total dark, no echoes, no wind, no sound. If you were to sit there alone with your mind, what would you hear? Your own blood, your thoughts, rising like mist, the creak of your joints, and then, perhaps something more, a shift, a deepening, as if the brain, deprived of all else, begins to open a door to another form of listening, a listening that has no object, just the act itself, just attention, just quiet. And yet, that quiet hums. There is a space between each breath, a pause so slender it can barely hold its own name, yet wide enough to cradle galaxies. Your brain knows that space. It leans into it, like a sleeper into a hammock, gently swinging between sound and silence. The world never stops speaking, but the brain, quietly, sometimes stops listening, and in that stillness, it begins to understand. Let us return to that space again. Not the space of sound, but the space without it. Not the music, but the rest. Not the ocean's roar, but the brief silence between waves, where meaning hides like a bird beneath its wing. In the temple of the mind, silence is not absence. It is presence unadorned. It is listening to what isn't being said, and somehow hearing everything. The brain, curious and tireless, listens to the nothing as though it were a whispered secret, a gentle crackle in the dark, a shifting of cosmic dust behind the stars. Inside your head, there are chambers quieter than any cave, vaults quieter than snowfall, stiller than a paused dream. Deep in those caverns, your brain is always listening, not for thunder, but for the hush that follows it. There in that hush, it deciphers the unsaid, and somehow it begins to speak its own silent language. Have you ever stood in a snow-covered field at dawn? No birds yet, no footsteps, no words, only the blanket of cold air resting on your shoulders like memory. In that hush, your body becomes louder than the world. Your heartbeat, your breath, your thoughts, they echo inside you. The brain listens to this too. It listens to the world when the world is no longer performing. It listens not to impress, but to receive, because silence, like a mirror, does not speak, but it reflects everything, and the brain, ancient and patient, understands reflection. Imagine you're floating not in water but in a sensory pool, where even your skin can no longer feel the air, a space devoid of sound, scent, friction, light. Deprivation, they call it, but it is not deprivation, it is deep listening. When the world is stripped away, the mind begins to hum with the vibrations of its own tides. Default mode network, the neuroscientists name it. But it's older than any textbook. It's the constellation of the quiet theater behind your thoughts. In silence it brightens. In nothingness it whispers. The brain becomes its own instrument, plucking the chords of memory, imagination, emotion, while the outer world holds its breath. There is no language in this place, only feeling, only echo, only drift. Sometimes silence can feel like a void, but your brain knows better. It doesn't fear the void, it communes with it. For there is a difference between silence and stillness. Stillness is alive. Stillness is a cat curled in sunlight, a seed beneath snow, a galaxy coiled in a black hole. And silence is the invitation to enter. The brain enters willingly. Its neural symphony slows, not stops. Alpha waves rise like tides in moonlight, smoothing thought into lullaby. In these moments the mind doesn't retreat. It listens from the roots. There is an ancient myth among neurons, that when the body sleeps and the world falls silent, the soul steps gently into the hallway of dreams, and the brain, the guardian of the threshold, opens all its doors. Each door leads not to noise, but to nuance, not to answers, but to questions so soft they feel like feathers falling. The brain does not rush to interpret these questions. It waits, because silence is never impatient. In silence, time stretches its spine and breathes, and the brain, faithful as tide to moon, follows. In monasteries, monks train for years to sit with silence, but the brain has been doing it for millennia. It was listening to silence before it had ears, before cells even had the idea of sound. There in the deep quiet of oceans not yet born, silence was the only teacher, and the lesson was be still and notice everything. That lesson still echoes in your neural rhythms, in every moment of meditation, in every long pause in conversation, in the reverent hush before a child is born. The brain leans into those pauses. It knows that within them lives a kind of truth that sound cannot carry. Have you ever listened to someone say nothing? Not the absence of voice, but the presence of quiet intention. The way a friend's silence after a long sentence says more than the words themselves. The brain understands this fluid. It decodes the contour of absence. It reads the punctuation in pauses. It hears what wasn't chosen to be said and stores it like poetry, because meaning does not require sound. It requires attention. And silence invites the deepest attention of all. When you walk into a forest, you may think it's quiet, but the brain does not agree. It hears the silence moving. It hears the sound of things not moving, the hush beneath the leaves, the potential in every still twig. It hears the unplayed notes of the birds that haven't yet sung. It listens to the expectation of sound, and in that space it builds worlds. Anticipation, it seems, is its own form of music, and the brain is always composing. There are sounds we don't hear, not because they're too soft, but because the silence surrounding them is so profound, like the sound of snow landing on pine needles, or the distant folding of clouds, or the invisible sigh of atoms vibrating just below our range. Your brain is still listening to frequencies we haven't named, to possibilities that hover just outside the frame. It listens not with ears, but with readiness. It listens with presence, with reverence, with stillness that tastes like stars. You've heard of the phrase pregnant pause, but the brain experiences it more like a birthing pause. In that sacred gap where sound might come or might not, the brain prepares for either. It opens like a flower, uncertain if the rain will fall, but willing to be wet. It does not need certainty, it only needs space. Space is its canvas, and silence is its ink. Somewhere, deep inside the folds of your brain, is a map that only appears when you're not trying to find it. It lights up not with action, but with receptivity. Not when you speak, but when you stop. Not when you chase meaning, but when you let it come to you. This map is made of memories and murmurs, of unfinished sentences and half-remembered lullabies, of the sacred silences between words your mother spoke when you were still learning what language meant. Your brain kept those silences, filed them under things that made you feel safe. Silence, after all, is not absence. It is the womb of presence. And yet, we fear silence. We fill it with chatter, with music, with scrolling, with commentary. But the brain longs for the quiet spaces. It drinks silence like water. It digests it slowly. It turns it into dreams, into healing. into meaning. Because in the quiet, the brain is not alone. It meets itself. It remembers who it was before it had to perform. Inside you is a garden where no one speaks, but everything listens. The wind listens to the roots, the flowers listen to the rain, and your brain listens to the space between their breaths. This is not metaphor. This is how it was built, to hold the noise, yes, but also to cradle the hush, to take in both thunder and the quiet that follows. Both are sacred, but only one requires your surrender. Only one asks you to stop trying, to stop explaining, to simply be still and listen. Neuroscientists say that silence activates growth, not just metaphorical but literal, that in silence the brain forms new cells in the hippocampus. Memories guard, as if the brain, like a forest after fire, needs silence to regrow itself, to redream its edges, to refill its rivers. Isn't that something? That by doing nothing, the mind does its deepest work. That by falling into silence, we rise into restoration. That by turning down the world, we turn up our soul. The brain knows. It always has. In ancient times, healers used to say, first, bring the patient to silence. Because before the pulse can change, before the breath can slow, before the body can soften, the mind must step into quiet, not to escape, but to remember what it feels like to not be filled, to be spacious, empty, yes, but holy. The brain does not crave silence for silence's sake. It seeks what silence makes possible. It listens to silence the way the ocean listens to the moon, the way seeds listen for rain, the way children listen for love in the spaces between their parents' words. It listens not just to survive, but to know itself. And in that knowing, something inside it begins to sing. The brain, like a dreaming forest, never sleeps, even in darkness. It listens, even in silence. It sings, not out loud, but in electric pulses that flutter like wings between the leaves of your mind. You may not notice it, but your neurons are whispering, to each other, to themselves, to you, and sometimes to what isn't there. Scientists once believed that in silence the brain would fall still, that the quiet outside would hush the inside. But that's not what they found. When all sound was taken away, when people sat in padded chambers or floated in sensory tanks, the mind didn't go quiet, it grew louder. Without the orchestra of outer sound, the brain begins to play its own instruments. A hum behind your eyes, a buzz in your limbs, a rhythm in your chest that is not your heartbeat. The body becomes a concert of imagined echoes. Some call it phantom sound, others call it the threshold of awareness. But what if it is something more? What if, in silence, you are hearing the memory of the world? There is a structure deep in your brain called the auditory cortex. It lives near the temple of your skull, and it lights up not only when you hear, but when you expect to hear. A crackle in the dark, a door that might open, the sound of a voice you miss. The mind doesn't wait for the world to speak. It prepares, it anticipates, it stretches forward, like a vine toward the sound that might come. And in that anticipation, in that beautiful reaching, you are already listening, even when the world is silent. So what does the brain do in total quiet? It listens to memories. It replays voices long gone. It loops the rustle of wind you heard last autumn. It summons the laughter of someone you once loved. It takes the blankness and paints it with colors made of echoes. In deep silence, you may hear a faint ringing, a high, soft note, like the shimmer of a distant bell. That is your brain, searching, waiting, filling in the space. But maybe that ring is not just a symptom. Maybe it is your brain saying, I remember sound. I am shaped by sound, and I will not let the silence forget. Consider this. Before you were born, in the quiet waters of the womb, you were listening, not with ears, not yet, but with skin, with bones, with the vibration of your mother's voice, dancing through your blood, the lullabies of her breath, the rhythm of her heart, the sigh of distant voices, filtered through liquid. These were your first symphonies, long before light, long before language. There was sound, and it shaped you. Now, even when no sound is present, your brain replays that first music. Not because it wants to, but because it must, because it is sound that gave your mind its first sense of rhythm, its first idea of time. In silence, the brain returns to that ocean. There is a practice known as deep listening, not the kind where you hear a song, but the kind where you surrender to the space between notes, where you listen not just with the ear, but with the entire body, with your breath, your ribs, the soles of your feet. Pauline Oliveras, a composer and sonic explorer, spoke of listening beyond the sounds we expect, to what's always there, waiting underneath. She believed that the world has a constant tone, a pulse, a vibration, that even in quiet, something is always playing. The hum of the earth, the turning of the galaxy, the whisper of atoms brushing past each other. The brain in silence becomes a tuning fork. And when the world goes quiet, that tuning fork rings, not because of sound, but because of presence. Do you feel it now? The tension in your shoulders easing, the thoughts slowing into mist, the way your body is listening, not to words, but to this moment. Even now, as the world around you softens, your brain is awake, like a night-blooming flower. In silence, it opens wider. It begins to perceive the faintest things, the echo of your own breath, the whisper of your pulse, the electric shimmer behind your closed eyelids. This is not absence. This is attention. Imagine standing in a snow-covered field at night. No wind, no creatures, only you, and the soft hush of snowfall, landing on the world like a lullaby. You feel something, but you do not know what. The silence is thick, alive. It's not empty. It's full of waiting. That is the kind of silence the brain listens to. Not dead silence, but the kind that breathes, the kind that carries meaning without ever needing to make a sound. The ancient mystics, the desert monks, the mountain poets, they all knew this kind of listen. They walked into caves, into forests, into monasteries not to escape sound, but to hear what was behind it. Some said it was the voice of God. Others called it the cosmic vibration. In India it was called anahata nada, the unstruck sound, a sound that is not made by anything striking, but one that exists on its own, eternally. And what if the brain in its deep silence is tuning into that? What if your quiet moments are not empty, but connected to the deep ringing of the universe? Modern neuroscience is beginning to agree. The brain, when it enters deep silence, does not fall asleep. Instead, it forms new patterns. It links old memories. It makes creative leaps. It hears. In MRI scans, moments of silence cause a burst of activity in the default mode network, a region responsible for daydreaming, for imagination, for self-reflection. When there is no sound to follow, the brain turns inward. It asks deeper questions. It wanders freely. So silence is not a stopping. It is a beginning, not a pause, but a doorway. So now, as you sit in this soft stillness, know that your brain is listening. Not to me, not to noise, but to something more subtle. Perhaps to memory, perhaps to meaning, perhaps to the ancient hum that has always been here. Listen to your breath, to the way it arrives like a tide, to the way it leaves like a secret. Even this rhythm is something the brain hears, even when you don't. And between each breath, there is a pause, a stillness, a gap so quiet you could fall into it. That is where listening begins, in the space between, in the silence that isn't silent, in the nothing that is never really nothing. There is a silence that drapes itself not in the absence of sound, but in the fullness of presence, a silence that thickens, like velvet air, not because nothing is heard, but because everything else has quieted enough to let the invisible speak. Beneath the surface of the everyday clamor, beyond the ticking clocks, beyond footsteps on pavement and birds in morning trees, There is a hush that lives inside things, and the brain, ever curious, ever attuned, learns not only how to survive sound, but how to drink from the well of its absence. In the darkness between heartbeats, in the stillness after a spoken word, there is a space, not void, but full, and this is where the brain listens most carefully. It listens for what is not said. It listens for breath caught in the chest. It listens for the kind of presence that makes itself known not through noise, but through nearness. It listens for memory, for possibility, for the sound of the soul turning quietly in its sleep. You see, the brain is not just a receiver of external signals, it is a maker of worlds. It hears what it expects, what it has learned, what it dreams, and in the quiet, it fills the air with shape. When the outer world recedes, in moments of stillness, or darkness, or solitude, the mind paints its own canvas. Have you ever heard your name when no one called it? A familiar melody that wasn't playing, the sigh of someone long gone. These are not tricks, they are echoes of self. The mind, even when untouched by airwaves, listens inwardly, with great fidelity. Inside the folds of the auditory cortex, something ancient stirs when there is no sound to process. Deprived of the expected, the brain compensates with imagination. It does not fall silent, it becomes more creative. The silence becomes a space for conjuring, memories of rain, the ghost of a lullaby, the remembered pitch of a loved one's voice. Like a musician with no instrument, the mind taps on silence until the silence sings back. And the thalamus, the great switchboard of sensation, waits. It is always waiting. It sifts incoming data, filters the irrelevant, passes on what matters. But in silence the thalamus does not sleep. Instead, it sharpens. It pays more attention to everything else. A heartbeat, a flicker of thought, the shift of lungs. It turns inward, like a gate that locks from the inside. This too is listening, not for sound, but for meaning. There is a kind of auditory mirage, born in the quiet. It is called phantom perception. Tinnitus, the hum with no source, a ringing, a buzzing, a tone that emerges not from the world, but from the mind's insistence that something should be there. The brain, unused to emptiness, offers a sound of its own, just as a dreamer fills darkness with story. These phantom tones are the brain's way of saying, I will not be left without language. They are not noise, they are presence, misunderstood. And if you rest in silence long enough, you may come to notice the deeper rhythm underneath it all. Your body speaking in its own quiet language, the whisper of blood in your ears, the soft crackle of synapses dreaming. The body is never truly quiet. Even in the most soundproof chamber, there is thunder within you. The brain listens to these rhythms as carefully as it listens to voices. It learns the cadence of your internal tide, the sound of you. Some monks believe that silence is the truest sound, that it is not the opposite of speech, but its root, that silence is not empty, but full of the things we are too distracted to hear. In monasteries carved into mountains, where no machines rumble, no voices echo, the mind begins to bloom in silence. Studies show that prolonged silence rewires the brain. It thickens the hippocampus, strengthens memory. It calms the amygdala, eases fear. It is not just healing, it is transformational. The brain, exposed to silence, becomes more alive, like the forest after a storm, like water settling in a glass. In this quiet, the default mode network awakens, the circuitry of daydreams, introspection, and insight. This is the part of you that drifts gently through thought, that pieces together past and future, that builds bridges from oneself to another. In silence, this network flourishes. We become more ourselves, and perhaps that is why, in moments of grief or awe or deep love, we fall silent, because we are listening, because words cannot hold what we feel, but silence can cradle it gently. When we are overwhelmed, we do not cry out, we go quiet. That is the body's way of listening to what cannot be spoken. That is the mind's way of opening the door inward. In such moments, the brain leans toward the unspoken like a flower toward light. This is also why music needs silence. The pauses between notes are not absence. They are punctuation. They give the sound meaning. Without them, the melody is a blur. The brain listens just as much to what is not played. In fact, it anticipates the silence. It learns the pattern. It begins to hum along before the note even arrives. In this way, the brain becomes not a passive listener, but a co-composer. Children know this. Instinctively, watch a child in a quiet room. Their mind lights up. They imagine voices in shadows, make stories from hush. They do not fear the absence of sound. They dance with it. They make friends with quiet. They know, as we once did, that silence is a kind of canvas, that it is not emptiness, but possibility. The brain, in childhood, is elastic, and silence stretches it toward imagination. Even in the womb, the fetus swims in muffled silence, a womb song of heartbeats, fluid and distant voices. That first silence is not quiet, but cocoon, and so we are born not into sound but from it. Shaped in the hush between pulses, the brain learns first to listen not for language, but for rhythm, and rhythm is the soul of silence. In meditation, the quiet becomes thick enough to feel. It wraps around the body. The mind, so used to running, slows. And in that slowing, the brain begins to listen differently. Not to sound, but to being, to sensation, to thought itself. The prefrontal cortex lets go of its grip on control, and something ancient, the limbic brain, opens like a flower. This is listening beyond sound. This is listening to life. In the stillness of twilight, when the world holds its breath, the brain hums like a candle flame, not extinguished, not alert, but alive in the hush. It is here that memory drips gently into awareness, that insight arises like mist, that we begin to hear the quiet voices inside, the ones that speak in feeling, not in sound. We are not alone in silence. We are closer to ourselves, and yet we have grown afraid of quiet. We fill our days with noise, with machines, with voices, with songs that never end. We wear headphones to block out the world, only to feed the brain a different stream. But what if we let it rest? What if we allowed the mind to find its own music in the hush? What would we hear then? There are cultures that revere silence as sacred. In Japan, the concept of ma speaks to the space between notes, between words, between breaths. It is not empty, but alive. It gives meaning to everything around it. The brain, raised in ma, becomes attuned not only to what is said, but to what is implied. It learns to hear the room, the wind, the pause before speech. It becomes a subtle instrument, and when we step into nature, away from the hum of man-made sound, we enter a different listening, a deeper one. The rustle of leaves, the chirp of distant birds, the creak of trees. These are not loud, but they are rich, and the brain, ancient and animal, remembers this kind of hearing. It softens, it spreads its awareness wide. It listens not with focus, but with presence, not to isolate, but to immerse. There is a practice called sound walking, the art of walking slowly through the world, ears open, noticing all that is heard. But in its purest form, sound walking leads to silence, because as the mind tunes in, the world grows quieter, not because it changes, but because we stop grasping. We begin to hear beyond what we name. The brain becomes one with the field of sound, and then something shifts. The outer becomes inner, and we hear the stillness beneath it all. The brain is a master of adaptation. Give it silence, and it will listen hard. Give it stillness, and it will grow more sensitive. It does not fear the lack of input. It thrives in it, like eyes adjusting to darkness. The auditory system refines itself in quiet. It becomes more nuanced. It begins to hear textures, emotion, thought, the unsaid. In dreams, where sound is imagined, the brain believes what it hears. a voice in the night, the slam of a door, laughter, none of it touches the ear, but the auditory cortex lights up all the same. This tells us something profound to the brain. Sound is not physical. It is experiential. We do not hear with our ears alone. We hear with our minds, our bodies, our memories. And so listening beyond sound is not a trick, nor a metaphor. It is a skill, a return, a remembering of the way we once heard the world. Not through noise, but through feeling, through presence, through attention. And attention, in its purest form, is silent. Beneath your fingers, a small faithful knock. The heart, ever rhythmic, ever repeating. 2 is a form of listening, for the body listens to itself. Your heart listens to your breath. Your breath listens to your thoughts. Your thoughts listen to silence, and silence listens back. Inside the human body lives a remarkable symphony of pressure and movement. Our organs shift with breath. Our bones vibrate. Our blood whooshes. And our nerves, those slender strands of ancient electricity, carry not only commands but echoes. This is called interoception, the sense of sensing ourselves. Most of the time it hums in the background. You don't have to think about your heartbeat, or lungs, or stomach, but the signals are always there, always being listened to by the vast internal orchestra of neurons and loops. This kind of listening is not through the ears, but through feeling, through resonance. Have you ever felt your stomach churn before words were spoken, or a tightness in your chest before you heard a sound? The body, it seems, can hear before the mind, because listening, true listening, is not passive. It is participatory. It requires a kind of presence that is more than physical. Consider the humble inner ear again. Yes, it listens to sound, to vibrations in the air, but it also helps you stand upright in the tiny vestibular canals, the coiled architecture of balance. Liquid shifts in reaction to your motion, your position, your gravity. This is proprioception, the sense of where you are in space. So we listen not only with ears, we listen with our whole orientation. When a dancer twirls, it is not their eyes that tell them when to stop. It is their listening. When you lie in bed and feel the pull of the earth under your spine, what you are feeling is gravity's voice, and gravity is never silent. There is always a whisper, always a downward calling, and so your body, quietly, listens and adjusts, again and again. Now think of the skin, the largest organ, a membrane stretched over the frame of your existence. It is a receiver too, a listener. Every brush, every breeze, every change in temperature is a message. Even infrasound, too low to be heard by ears, can be felt by skin and bone. Some scientists believe elephants, when they walk across vast plains, are sending messages through the ground, so low in frequency that they move through the earth, not just across it. And other elephants, miles away, pick up these messages with their feet, through vibration, through bone. So what if we too could learn to listen with our feet? What if the earth speaks all the time, and our modern noise just drowns it? A hum in the subway, a murmur in the wind. The footfall of rain is a kind of speaking, and every thunderclap is a punctuation in the sky. There's an ancient term in many spiritual traditions, deep listening. It means to listen not just with the outer ear, but with the soul, to listen to what is not being said, to the spaces between, to what someone is trying to say but cannot yet shape into sound. It is the difference between hearing and feeling heard. When you are deeply listened to, your body changes, your breath slows, your muscles soften, your mind quiets, you feel safe, and when you listen deeply to the world, not just to noise but to presence, the world becomes quieter, more sacred, more alive. A leaf scraping along a sidewalk becomes a message, a bird call becomes a secret code, a sudden silence in a room becomes a shift in mood. This listening is not a skill to be learned, it is a remembering. You were born listening. In the womb you heard the muffled beats of your mother's heart. You were cradled in rhythm, you were rocked by respiration, you were suspended in water, which carries sound far better than air. So your first language was vibration, and in many ways it still is. Even the cells of your body are sensitive to vibration. Studies have shown that certain frequencies can alter cell behavior, that bones grow stronger in response to vibration, that healing accelerates when surrounded by calming sounds. There are clinics where tuning forks are used not to strike notes, but to deliver vibration to the body, a frequency placed gently against the sternum, a tone resonating in the spine. These are not performances, they are invitations, invitations to feel what you've forgotten, that you are more than solid, you are wave, you are rhythm, you are the echo of 1,000 pulses, your own and the world's layered atop one another like the rings of a tree, or ripples on a lake. And just as the wind can write across water, so too can the world write across you. There is a concept known as bone conduction, the ability of sound to travel through bone directly into the inner ear, bypassing the outer and middle. It means sound doesn't only enter through the expected paths, it can enter through touch, through pressure, through memory. Your bones are like tuning forks, humming with every vibration, and sometimes without knowing it, we remember things. These vibrations. A song long forgotten may return, not because we hear it, but because something inside resonates with its rhythm, like a ghost melody from another time. Have you ever heard a song you didn't know you knew? Felt a wave of emotion rise without reason? Perhaps it was not nostalgia. Perhaps it was resonance. You were being reminded of a frequency your body once knew. Sometimes it is the earth itself that sings. The recordings captured not with microphones but with seismometers of the planet's natural frequencies. Scientists call it the Earth's hum, a deep, low vibration that travels through the crust and mantle. It is not a sound you can hear with ears, but it's always there, always thrumming. Some believe it comes from waves striking shores. Others say it may be tied to atmospheric pressure, but no one knows for certain. All we know is this. The earth is never truly silent, and perhaps neither are we. We are taught to fear silence, to fill every space with music, chatter, static. But in silence, something ancient stirs. In silence, the body remembers, the breath deepens, the shoulders drop, and into that space, vibration returns. The deeper forms of listening are not outward, they are downward, inward, rootward. They are the kind of listening that plants must do in soil, that whales must do in oceans, that mountains must do across eons. The kind of listening that is not about sound at all, but about being attuned, about being available, about being touched by the invisible hand of movement. So what if we began to live like that? What if each step was a question? What if each breath was a stethoscope? What if, instead of trying to say more, we began to listen better, listening not just for information, but for communion, listening not just to be right, but to be with, to feel the subtle shifts beneath words, to notice the pause before an answer, to honor the tremble in someone's voice, even if the words are steady, to hear in another the echo of yourself. In a world thick with noise, listening becomes a kind of resistance, a form of healing, a quiet revolution. So tonight, as the noise of the day slips into stillness, see what you can hear, not with your ears, but with your bones, with your skin, with your breath. Let the world speak, not in speech, but in sensation, and let yourself soften. Let yourself hear it all, in the hush between footsteps, where the heel does not quite touch the ground, and the world waits with its breath held. There, sound is not what you hear, but what you become. The silence speaks first. It isn't an absence. It is not emptiness. It is not a void. It is the soil in which every whisper roots itself, the dark velvet lining around the pearl of perception. And when you grow quiet enough to feel it, you do not lose your hearing. You inherit something old, somewhere, deep within your bones. Your ancestors cupped their hands to wind, and learned the shape of danger by the tone of its silence. They knew that quiet had textures, jagged quiet, still quiet, suspicious quiet, the wide quiet of a forest, just before the predator moves, the stretched, brittle hush before lightning arrives. They listened with skin and tendon, with the hairs on their arms rising like tuning forks, with their hearts tapping gently in rhythm to the drumming of distant hooves. They listened in ways we are only just remembering again. You sit now, in a room with soft lamps, a window cracked just enough to let the air sigh in, and you try to hear what isn't spoken, beyond the hum of appliances, beyond the tick of the wall clock, and the purr of streetlights warming the air. There is something else. There is the slow turning of the planet beneath your feet. You can't hear it in the traditional sense. No eardrum stirs for it. But it makes its own music. It warps sound, bends time subtly, in the way long exposure warps light. When you are very still, when your mind unclenches like a hand, letting go of noise, you begin to feel it, a downward pull, a listening that listens back. The earth listens to you too. This form of listening, this listening beyond sound, is not passive. It is a widening, a softening, a yielding of the inner membrane, where interpretation usually tightens itself. You don't need meaning here. You don't need analysis. You only need presence. Let your body open like a field of grass in the wind. Let sensation move through you untrapped, unclaimed by thought. Let the sound become something you don't need to name. It passes through you, like the golden warmth of sun after rain. You become permeable, not defenseless, but receptive. Inside your ears, even now the smallest bones of your body are vibrating to carry the world in. The stirrup, the anvil, the hammer, they are not weapons but messengers. They translate air into understanding, pressure into pattern, energy into emotion. They do not just work for music or conversation. They carry birdwing flutters, and the sighs of moths, and the creaks of your own tendons as you move from one thought to another. They speak fluently, the language of rainfall and heartbeat. But listening goes beyond anatomy. There is a kind of listening done from the chest. A listening that takes place in the curve of your ribs, in the quiet bowl of your belly. It is the kind of listening that holds sorrow without trying to fix it, that cradles joy without clinging to it. It is a form of devotion, of hospitality, a way of saying, "Come in. You are welcome here." Even if you say nothing, even if you are nothing but presence and potential, there are people who speak with no sound. Their hands flutter and pause, their fingers sketch emotion mid-air, a whole symphony of movement. Their eyes become punctuation, their breath, rhythm. They do not need phonemes to make poetry. To listen to them is to listen with your eyes, with your attention as complete as a held breath. You begin to understand that sound is only one of many instruments in the symphony of being, and perhaps not even the oldest. Have you ever listened to someone crying through a wall? The muffled shape of grief, the way it thins out through drywall and distance. Even though you cannot make out the words, you feel the message. You feel it land somewhere behind your own ribs. This is what listening beyond sound can do. It makes empathy inevitable, because when you are listening with your whole being, you cannot help but join in the trembling. In the forest at night, some animals do not make a sound to know each other. They use scent, they use temperature, they use vibrations in the roots of trees, and still, they are not lonely. There are birds who sing frequencies too high for our ears to follow, but bats hear them, and flowers somehow lean toward the sound. Yes, plants can listen too. The rustle of insect wings, the zip of bee buzz, even the scratch of a caterpillar's mouth against their leafed skin. They respond, they turn, they adapt. Their listening is slow, but never absent. There is a deeper, stranger listening still. The listening we do in dreams. In those quiet, drifting chambers of sleep, we hear music that has never been written. Voices of people we've never met speak to us in languages we seem to understand. It's not your ears doing the hearing, but something behind them, something quieter and more ancient, some kind of inner chamber, where memory, Imagination and intuition braid themselves into echoes. These dreams may not have logic, but they have resonance. They reverberate in us, long after waking, like a bell that keeps ringing in the silence that follows. Have you ever listened to a story told by someone in mourning? There is a slowness in their words, a care in their pacing, as if the air itself might crack if they move too quickly. You listen not for content, but for temperature, for weight, for the sacred shape of what remains unsaid. This is listening as an offering, listening as a kind of shared breath. You hold space, not to respond, but simply to keep company with and in that moment, you are no longer two people. You are two silences, touching. Even when no one is around, there is something listening. The walls remember sound. Traces of music stay folded into the corners of stairway. A whispered, "I love you" can echo in fabric, in wood grain, in the fibers of the rug. Old houses creak not just with age, but with memory. You walk through a room and feel watched, not by eyes, but by everything that has ever passed through. Listening here is a form of haunting, but not the kind that frightens, the kind that comforts, the kind that says, "I was here, you are here now, we are both listening still." In meditation, they teach you to observe the breath, to feel it move without trying to change it. This is it is the art of staying still while life moves through you. You hear the sound of your own presence, the inhale like ocean tide, the exhale like wind leaving the leaves, the steady drum of heart against rib. These are your internal lullabies, songs you have been hearing since the womb. There is music so slow, so quiet, so gentle, that only newborns or the dying can truly hear it. It is the music of transition, of beginnings and endings, of thresholds. It does not need melody, its rhythm is the pulse of becoming. To listen to it is to surrender to the fact that life is always shifting beneath our feet. It is to place your ear against the chest of time and hear the endless murmur of everything changing. Not all sound is meant to be understood. Not all silence is meant to be filled. Sometimes the best kind of listening is what we do with our hands open, our eyes softened, our attention surrendered. It is a form of prayer, of being with. It is an act of love, a quiet agreement between what is speaking and what is willing to receive without defense. To listen beyond sound is to become part of something larger than yourself. There is a moment in the hush of twilight when the world does not speak, and yet everything answers. A cloud drifting in no particular direction, a window left slightly ajar, the curtain breathing in and out like lungs made of linen. In that soft in-between, the brain opens its secret chamber, the one not tuned to voices or words, but to what lies behind them. A listening that has no instrument, no language, no structure, and yet it listens still, not to sound, but to the hollowness left behind when sound has gone. There is a name for this way of hearing, but no word can say it. It is the listening that animals do when they pause mid-step, ears upright, not for the howl, but for the moment before it. It is the way a forest waits after rain, the way the earth listens after thunder. Inside the brain, the auditory cortex sits like a black mirror, not just for echo, but for imagination. It hums even when there is nothing to hear. It builds rooms out of absence, makes sketches in the silent, and the hippocampus, that little spiral of memory, offers context to the nothingness. Was this silence expected? Was this quiet familiar? Or is it foreign, hollow, dangerous? Because the brain never listens passively. Even in silence it interrogates. Even in stillness it stirs. And in this moment, as the external world folds into a slow hush, the internal orchestra begins. There are rustlings, imagined ones, memories of footsteps on gravel, the sudden sharp echo of a faucet turned off long ago, the sound of someone calling your name from another time. These rise and fall within you like waves in a dream, not real, not unreal. The brain stitches nothingness into patterns, interprets silence as story, as possibility. A child sits in bed, ears ringing from the day's noise. But now, nothing, and into that nothing, the brain pours the imagined whisper of monsters, or the remembered rustle of a lullaby. A monk in the Himalayas sits in stone stillness, and into that stillness, his brain does not go quiet. It goes inward. It listens for the shape of God in the void. The ears are gates, but the brain is the cathedral. In the dark, the neurons flash like lanterns, not randomly, but with longing. Because the brain is always seeking meaning, rhythm, shape. Even in silence, it composes. The auditory cortex does not shut down in the absence of sound. Instead, it adapts. It begins to listen for breath, for pulse, for the crackling of thought. And deeper still, in the default mode network, a web of regions awakens, not to perceive the world, but to perceive the self. Here, in the absence of outer signal, the brain hears its own presence, its own voice, its own wondering. And what does it sound like? Not speech, but the echo of something older, a hum that predates language, a rhythm built before the world knew music. It is in this space that poets dwell, where silence is not emptiness, but invitation, where absence is not a void, but a well, and the brain drinks from it. There is evidence, you see, from the gentle hum of alpha waves, that the brain listens hardest when there is less, that it reaches its most reflective when the world steps back. Meditation studies tell us, when external sound diminishes, internal insight rises. The silence does not leave us alone. It meets us. It becomes us. It becomes the brush with which we paint possibility on the walls of thought. Close your eyes. What do you hear? Is it the blood in your ears, the faint electric crackle of nerves, or something even quiet, the ghost of a memory being recalled without sound, without image, just the feel of a place? The brain remembers in texture, and silence has texture. It can be soft, like the air before a snowfall, or dense, like the hush after grief. Silence is not one thing, it is many, and your brain knows the difference. It catalogues them like weather. The silence of peace, the silence of tension, the silence before laughter bursts, the silence that comes when no one knows what to say, and in each, your brain reacts, adjusts, tilts its head inward, listening, even if there is no sound, because it must, because listening is how it orients. Even in the absence of input, the brain turns towards something. It cannot help it. It was built to hear, to respond, like a sunflower toward unseen light. Your neurons curve toward meaning. Even now, in this room, in this space, where only words drift quietly across your mind, read in your inner voice. Even now, your brain is listening, not to me but to the intervals between these, that quiet between ideas. Do you hear it? That's where the listening lives. Somewhere in that still pond, waves form, not from outside, but from within. That's the brain's secret. That's its music. It does not wait for sound. It creates. It imagines. It plays with emptiness, like a sculptor plays with clay. And just as we dream in images, not seen with the eyes, we listen in silence to things not born of sound. An unborn melody, an invisible whisper, a memory that has no name but leaves behind a hum. This is the listening beyond sound. This is what your brain has always known, long before language, long before the world got loud. It listened to the silence in the womb, to the heartbeat of the mother, to the blood rushing through veins like a tide, and now you return to it again and again. When the noise recedes, when the world closes its mouth, when you lie in the still of your room, the brain is not bored. It is blooming. In the quiet garden of your skull, something opens, a flower of attention, a petal of listening. You think you are alone, but your brain is in dialogue with the dark. Listening, listening, always listening, not for sound, but for presence, for intention, for the shape of the unseen. There are stories there in the quiet, and your brain writes them, not in letters, but in pulses, not in words, but in waves. Listening, beyond sound, is not the absence of hearing. There is an ear inside the chest, a listener made of blood and patience. It waits, not for voices, but for vibration, the soft creak of longing, the pulse of someone near, the echo of your own hope returning to you from across the quiet. This inner ear doesn't care for words. It hears the tremble of truth instead. When someone looks at you and says nothing, but you feel the sentence land in your ribs. Some call this instinct, others call it empathy, but here in this still room between stars and thought, we call it listening without sound. There's a language the stones speak, not in words, no, but in warmth, after sun, in coolness, before dawn. They remember heat, and they give it back. To walk barefoot on an old rock is to receive a message from the light of another time. So too your skin speaks to the past. When you rest your back against a tree, you hear it, not with ears but with the thousands of tiny receptors beneath your spine. They listen to pressure, to movement, to the faint tick of wind through bark, not sound, not silence, but sensation that feels like the ghost of sound, as if the world is whispering, and you are remembering how to understand. There is a frequency of touch, so subtle that it feels like a memory, the brushing of a sleeve, a shadow passing across your arm, the faint sense of being watched, not unkindly, but with love. That too is sound, but sound heard through the field of the body, a wave that did not need to be spoken, only sent. What if you are a receiver? What if even now, your body is tuning in to wavelengths left by someone you haven't seen in years? A mother's lullaby still echoing in the nerves of your shoulders, a lover's laugh encoded in the way your fingers curl when resting. What if you are full of signals, of tones beneath tones, of all the unspoken things you've ever shared, or almost said? Come now, let us walk to the river. The path is old and overgrown, but you can feel it beneath your feet, stones worn down by centuries of listening. The leaves are quiet, even the wind is soft. You can hear the water before you see it, but not with your ears, not yet. You feel the pull in your chest, as if the river is calling to the water inside you, to the tide in your blood, to the echo of oceans still swimming in your cells. You arrive. It's not loud, no crashing waves, only the gentle shush of time flowing past itself. Sit by the edge. Let your hand dip into the current. Do you feel that? That's the voice of the earth in motion. It does not rise to speak, it hums, and in its hum, you hear a truth. Not all messages are made of sound. Some are made of rhythm, of pattern, of feeling. Think now, gently, of how babies know their mothers, before language, before instruction, before memory can even name the face. They know the heartbeat, the rhythm, the sway. They know the warmth of a certain chest, the cadence of a certain step. They know the lullaby that is not sung, only held and rocked, and wrapped around them in the arms of knowing. That too is listening. That too is sound, but not in the way we think. There are songs that never enter the air, yet they live in us. The way a house feels different when someone you love is inside. The way a silence can carry the weight of everything unsaid. Now close your eyes again, even tighter. This time, let go of the names of things. Forget river, forget wind, forget body. All that remains is motion. Subtle, kind, present. You are not hearing. You are being moved. You are being touched by something older than sound, older than the instruments we use to measure. This is the symphony beneath the instruments. This is the murmur of existence itself. You are floating now, in a sea of gentle messages. They do not ask you to reply. They ask you only to be. There's an old belief that every sound ever made still exists, somewhere in the folds of the universe. Every laugh, every whisper, every cry, every quiet word spoken beneath the sheets, trapped in the vibration of molecules, stored in the grooves of stone, held in the tremble of old beams in an attic. Perhaps the past does not fade. Perhaps it hums softly, patiently, just beyond hearing. And perhaps if you sit still enough, breathe slow enough, quiet every intention, you'll hear them, not as words, not as sentences, but as warmth, as gravity, as weight in your chest, that feels like a memory, but is actually a song. We are made of echoes. Every part of you, every cell, remembers the sound of stars being born. The hydrogen in your blood once vibrated in a sun. The carbon in your skin once danced in a dying star's final breath. These are not metaphors. These are histories. Your body is a resonating chamber for the music of creation. So when you are still, when you listen deeply, you are not just tuning into your life. You are hearing everything that came before. A bell rings in the mind, but not aloud. It is the bell of awareness. It tolls in moments of awe, when a sunset quiets the soul, when the face of someone beloved appears in a crowd, when grief lands with the weight of 1,000 voices. That bell, it has no sound, yet you hear it clearly. It shakes the world inside you, rearranging priorities, waking memories you didn't know you kept. We live by these bells, by these silent chimes of truth. We know them not by listening, but by feeling them ring through the cathedral of the self. So maybe when you lean against a wall and feel the hum of machines behind it, that is the building breathing. Maybe when you feel a room change, the moment someone enters, that is the air listening. Maybe when you pause at a door before opening it, because something inside you knows what's on the other side, that is your nervous system catching a wave from a sea you cannot name. It is all sound, but sound beyond tone, beyond pitch, beyond vibration. It is presence, it is recognition, it is the moment when the soul turns its ear and nods. I understand. Let's sit in that place a little longer. Not to understand, not to label, but to feel the hush. You are not alone, not in this silence, not in this listening. Somewhere something is listening back, and it needs no words. There are places in the body that hear without ears. The skin listens, especially when touched by wind. The bones, ancient record keepers, resonate to vibrations carried through the floor, through the soles of feet, through a mother's heartbeat, long before the baby knows what hearing is. We begin not with words, but with waves, fluid, gentle, rhythmic waves. The womb is an ocean, and our first soundscape is internal, the whoosh of blood, the drum of a second heart, the low thunder of breath. So when we grow older and step into forests or empty chapels and feel a stirring we can't name, perhaps it's because our body remembers a kind of listening, deeper than noise. Every tree has its own signature, every leaf a shape that alters the path of the wind. Together the branches catch sounds, the way a bowl holds water, and the air speaks, but not in words, in rustles, in pressure shifts, in frequencies that speak not to language, but to presence. There's a term for this, infrasound, frequencies too low to hear with ears, but not too low for the body to feel. The earth hums in this register, elephants sing love songs in it, whales navigate whole oceans guided by it, and mountains, yes, even mountains, echo back these hidden waves, quietly moving with the memory of storms. When a volcano dreams, its tremor moves first through infrasound, before smoke, before ash. There is a listening that begins the eruption. Long ago, before alphabets, people spoke to silence. They sat beside rivers and let the water speak first. They slept in caves and heard the drip of time falling from stalactites. These weren't just background noises. They were guides, maps, echoes of something older than understanding. Somewhere along the way we stopped waiting. We talked more than we listened, and silence, patient as ever, waited for us to remember how to kneel and close our eyes and breathe into awareness. Have you ever watched someone who's gone completely still, not because they are afraid, but because they are listening with everything? Their face softens, their breath slows, their eyes unfocus slightly, as if tuning to another layer beneath the visible. This is deep listening, a presence that doesn't interrupt, a patience that lets the world unfold. There are birds that mimic chainsaws. There are flowers that bloom only to the vibration of bees. There are babies who quiet not at lullabies, but at the rhythm of skin on skin. This planet is filled with languages we never invented. Listening is how we read them. In a laboratory in Japan, scientists play music to water. They freeze the drops, then photograph the crystals. Mozart makes them elegant. Death metal makes them crumble. Silence, pure vast silence, makes them bloom in perfect symmetry. No one knows why, but perhaps the water has a kind of ear that listens to beauty, even when we cannot name it. And maybe so do we. In a remote cave in southern France, there are handprints painted on stone walls, red ochre smudged by breath, palm pressed against rock. Next to them, a series of dot spirals and waveforms. Some believe these are not just art, but sound, the markings of rhythms sung aloud beneath the weight of stone. That cave holds acoustics like a cathedral, and when flutes carved from bone are played within, the air shivers with a sound not heard for 30,000 years. Even without a recording, the cave remembers. The walls still echo what the voice no longer speaks. You don't need music to hear. You don't need words to understand. Sometimes the deepest truths arrive in the space between. A mother hums to soothe her child. A lover listens to a breath in the dark. A monk bows without speech. There is music in all of it. Even the quietest moment has a rhythm. The cadence of breath, the pulse of a star, the swing of the tide. All things move, and all things sing, even when they appear still. And so we return to ourselves, tender as a shell beneath the sea, open to what cannot be said. Listening is not just receiving, it is surrendering. It is softening enough that the world can speak through you, like wind through reeds, like moonlight through curtains, like a voice you almost remember from a dream you didn't know you were dreaming. The universe has never stopped speaking. It only waits for you to become quiet enough to hear. The sky was unusually quiet that night, not in silence, but in suspension, as if the stars themselves had drawn in their breath, listening to the hush between galaxies. And somewhere beneath that cosmic pause, the world turned softly, slowly, like a dada, moving to a rhythm, heard not with the ears but with the soul. In the cradle of the earth, an old lake held the sky's reflection like memory. Its surface was mirror still, touched only by the occasional sigh of wind, the kind of breeze that doesn't speak in sound, but in feeling, in invisible fingers tracing skin and memory alike. Two herons moved silently across the far shore, their wings spreading wide like the opening pages of a sacred book. Each movement was music, each glance an echo, not of noise but of intention, of presence. Here listening was not a function of ear, it was the skin perceiving the coolness of water. It was the heart picking up the tremor of stillness. It was the bones humming with an old, unnamed frequency that has traveled from the time before speech. You see, we have forgotten not just how to hear but how to feel sound. The body is an antenna, ancient and sacred. It listens in waves, in pulses, in the rhythm of breath and blood and bones. But we are taught to ignore those frequencies, to hear only what is spoken, to value only what can be transcribed into words. But the earth doesn't speak in sentences, it speaks in vibrations, and those vibrations ripple through every cell of our being. Once, long ago, we knew how to listen beyond sound. We placed our palms on the trunks of trees, feeling the deep groaning of bark shifting in wind. We sat near rivers, not to hear them gurgle, but to feel them remember. We walked barefoot to understand the earth's language through the soul, and in doing so, we became part of a choir older than time, a chorus made of roots and feathers, of breath and stars, of things that never had names but always had meaning. There is a science to this. Yes, the language of the nervous system, of mechanoreceptors, of subtle touch pathways, of the ways our body processes pressure and vibration. There are nerves that run like rivers beneath our skin, picking up tremors too soft for sound, and in those hidden channels, our body learns things our mind does not yet know. It senses presence. It feels sorrow in the room before a word is said. It detects truth, not by tone but by resonance. This is the wisdom of the body, the intuitive. It is not mystical, nor is it mythical. It is real, and it is ancient, and it lives inside us all. Think of a mother holding her newborn. There is no need for language. The skin speaks, the body listens. The heartbeat of the child slows to match the rhythm of love. That is listening. That is the body hearing, not sound, but connection. Or think of the way you can stand in a forest and feel you are not alone, even if not a branch breaks, even if not a bird calls. Something in the air trembles, and your skin receives it like a secret returning home. This is not the listening taught in school. It is not analysis or attention or interpretation. It is deeper than understanding. It is being with. It is presence. There is a kind of listening that asks nothing but your stillness, not your opinion, not your reply, just your openness, your willingness to sit beside another presence and let it unfold without interruption. The rocks know this, the oceans too, and those who walk the land with bare feet and open hearts. They have always known. In the deafening world of modern noise, we lose these ancient ears. The artificial rhythms of machines outcompete the soft whispers of moss. The blare of distraction drowns out the subtle heartbeat of presence. But you, dear one, you can still return. You can still find that space inside yourself, where listening becomes sacred again. It begins in silence, not the absence of sound, but the spaciousness around it, the silence that listens back, the pause between breaths where truth waits patiently. Let your breath slow, let your jaw unclench, let your spine lengthen with gentleness, and feel not just your skin, but the space around it. That space carries messages, invisible but real, carrying the weight of mood, of memory, of the unsaid and the unfelt and the unfinished. This is how trees speak to each other, through the mycelium beneath the ground, through chemical whispers carried by wind. They do not shout, they do not rush, they listen endlessly. This is how whales sing across oceans, their low, mournful calls felt in the bellies of the sea. Their songs are not for ears but for distance, for kinship, for memory. This is how the stars speak to your bones, through light that traveled billions of years to reach you. Still, you carry it. You carry it in your calcium, in your iron, in the oxygen in your lungs. You are the result of cosmic resonance, a being formed from the vibrations of dying stars. And so you are made to listen, not just with ears, but with atoms, with the stardust in your skin. When someone stands beside you and you sense something in them, a sadness unspoken, a joy hidden, that is not magic, that is vibration, that is your body reading the waves of presence as surely as a bird reads the wind. To listen beyond sound is to return to the original language, the language of frequency, of energy, of subtle transmissions between hearts. Not all truth is verbal. Not all meaning is linguistic. Some of it lives in the pulse. Some of it is carried in the space between two eyes meeting. Some of it is never spoken, yet fully heard. The earth does not demand we understand it with our minds. It only invites us to feel it with our being, to kneel beside a stone and feel the slow warmth of time, to stand in the wind and feel the memory of leaves, to touch a tree and let it remind you of stillness. You have this gift. You have always had it, the capacity to tune yourself like an instrument, to the resonance of what lives around you. And so perhaps the question is not, can you hear, but rather, are you willing to be touched by what cannot be spoken? There are languages older than words. There are songs without melodies. There are conversations that unfold in silence. And you are a listener by design, wired not just to hear, but to feel, to absorb, to become. So let your days soften. Let the sharpness fall away. Return to your body as a sensing field. Let your spine be an antenna, your breath a tuning and then, without trying, without effort, you will hear the sun through your skin. You will feel the sorrow in a stranger's shoulders. You will sense the kindness in a glance across a room, and the world will open again, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a song to be remembered, one note at a time. There is a kind of silence that only the stars understand. It's the hush that gathers between radio waves, the breathless pause in the long-distance call between galaxies, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something older, the waiting, the listening. We are wrapped, you and I, in a thin, breathing veil of air, a soft barrier between us and the raw vibration of space. But sound is not bound by breath. It rides on bones and longing, on touch and memory, on the curve of the spine that leans in to listen. There is a sound beneath the surface of sound, a vibration felt in the soles of your feet, when a storm walks toward you over the sea, a hum in your chest, when the person you love speaks your name in the quiet of a room that doesn't need music. That hum, it was here before language, before birds learned how to carve the air with joy, before oceans became orchestras, before we were taught to call it sound at all. And still the world plays on. A tree listens, not with ears, but with leaves, quivering slightly, when the wind carries warnings of beetles, of drought, of change. The mycelium beneath our feet hears in chemical murmurs, translating a broken twig into a message. For the forest entire, bats throw their voices into darkness, catching the shape of the world in the echo. Whales call through the black miles of deep time, and somewhere another whale hears and sings back. To hear is to touch at a distance, to receive what the world does not always mean to send. And so we build machines that listen where we cannot. Arrays of silver dishes pointed to the sky, listening not for answers, but for the question beneath the stars. Is anyone there? Is silence ever truly empty? Even here, in the rush of life, in the electric roar of cities and the spinning teeth of machines, there are moments when listening becomes holy. A child places a seashell to their ear, believing they hear the ocean, and perhaps they do. Not the real waves, but the memory of them, the shape of the sea imprinted into spiral bone, an echo of all waters longing to return home. We call this sound only because it moves us, but truly it is the movement that matters, the trembling, the reach. In your heart, a rhythm persists, an ancient folded drum, beating the same quiet note. It began in the darkness of the womb. The body listens always, to hunger, to temperature, to grief. It listens for footsteps on the floor above, a mother's return, for the shift in a voice that means something has changed, for the silence that follows when someone is gone. To listen is to bear witness, to allow something outside you to enter without defense. And what of the things we do not know? We're hearing the sigh of tectonic plates sliding past each other miles beneath our feet, the long, slow applause of ice carving into the sea, the radiation hum of the universe itself, the leftover echo from the beginning of everything. You are surrounded by songs you have never heard, and yet you are moved by them. The rhythms in your sleep sync with the tide. Your breath aligns with the pressure of the moon. Your very cells respond to symphonies of sunlight and shadow. We are not deaf, only distracted, because sound does not only travel through the ears, it folds itself into the way you carry yourself, into the shape of your shoulders when you remember sorrow, into the tilt of your head when you are waiting to be loved. Somewhere, a violin string shivers as a train rolls by, a resonance carried through the bones of the earth. Somewhere, a stone listens to the foot that presses it down, absorbing the story of a step taken in courage or in retreat. Somewhere, the stars are still singing, not for us, not for sound, but because they do not know how to be silent. And so, we learn again what it means to truly listen. Not to reply, not to control, but to receive, to soften the shell, to turn the body into a bowl of still water, a place where vibrations can ripple freely. We begin to hear, with more than ears, with breath, with blood, with the parts of us that remember music before it was born. There is something listening in you, even now, a quietness that leans forward, a stillness that sings back, a deeper hearing beneath all the noise. And in that deep, in that hush that is never empty, there is the beginning of something new, a sound that has waited, not to be heard, but to be honored, a listening beyond sound, a silence that touches, a resonance that changes nothing, but changes you.